Ladies and gentlemen, today on the program, I have some advice for those of you out there right now who may feel stuck and who may be ruminating about it and who may be feeling depressed or upset or worried and don't know how to get out of it. I've got a little tip, a little trick, a little something you might consider to help you do that. And then, in response to a listener question, I am going to get very, very, very self-indulgent about some of the songs I have recorded as a drummer and why I like them and what they mean. It's fun for me. I hope it's fun for you. And hey, we'll get to it on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. One day, kids. One fine, mother-loving day. I'm going to record a podcast episode in my rebuilt little studio. And we are now, as I record this, it is Thanksgiving Day in Canada, gobble gobble. And I didn't dream when we embarked on the renovations earlier this summer that come gobble gobble day, I would still be fighting the sound of my furnace against my microphone, still stuck here in the midst of this chaos that is my jam space / workout space / repository for all the stuff that we had to take off the level we're renovating. But here we are, and to a certain extent, it's my own fault. We did not come into this reno with a proper plan, and now this is our first reno, okay? And so we didn't have the ducks in a row to the extent that we might have had, because we were shopping around for prices, and we were trying to find people to do certain bits of the operation, and that process took time. So in retrospect, were I to do this again, I would have had each phase laid out with who was doing it, and then I would have had them ready to go. So what happens now is we had our floor installed 3 weeks ago, and now there's the issue with the trim, and there's some special trim that needs to be done. We have some weird kind of stuff that needs to be finished out here. And we waited too long to greenlight the people to do it because we had different estimates on it. And the whole thing, it's just my own bureaucratic, it's my own decision-making, I guess, which has delayed each phase of the operation, which now pushes it into months and months and months for a job that, were I a little tighter with my scheduling, might have been done. As a consequence, I am still in this makeshift studio, standing here, recording to you, hoping that the sound of my furnace going, because it's now freaking cold outside, isn't going to disrupt the audio that I'm trying to broadcast to you. But one fine day, and hopefully before freaking Santa comes, at this point, I'll be back in my little studio, and all will be well. Until then, here we are. And this week, on this week's episode, I want to talk just a little bit about the churn. I've talked about the churn before. If you are new to the program, maybe you've not heard me talking about the churn before. The churn is that state of mind, state of being that we all get into at a certain point in time whereby we are usually stuck in terms of how to proceed with something. Now, this happens all the freaking time, all right? This happens to everybody. This happens in particular to artists. I have experienced it as a writer, as a musician, even as a podcaster. It happens all the time that I find myself stuck in terms of how to proceed on a thing. And you don't have to just be an artist. All right, that happens to everybody in life at some point in time. That can be to do with your career or a relationship or whatever kind of project you're working on. To a certain extent, I've churned at times over this renovation, over not knowing how to proceed, right? And for most people, being in that position, maybe not most, but for a lot of people being in that position, they're able to bring some perspective to the situation, right? And they can say, okay, here we are at this moment. Here we are. Remember that. Here we are. And it'll work itself out and it'll be okay. But for other people, they can find themselves in this position. And then if they are existential types like me, they can begin to churn. What, you ask yourself, motivated this course of conversation this week? Well, I had a chat with a friend, all right. Had a chat with an old pal who is an artist and who finds herself in this position right now. Now, if you are a songwriter, if you are a band, if you're a musician, you've been here before too. And it's this position whereby the stuff just ain't quite working. If you are a writer, you've been there. If you are a visual artist, you've been there. If you're anything, you've been there before. This position where the stuff just ain't working. And it's a really, really difficult place to be, especially if, like me, you're the sort of person who gets existential right away. And if you're an existential type, being in this position, especially with respect to a passion or with respect to something that you're pursuing as a career. You know, my friend is an artist. She is pursuing a career in music. And you come to this point where you've put in the effort and you've done this and you've done that, and you just reach roadblocks all the time. You know, life ebbs and flows. And a lot of the time when it's flowing, if you're like me, again, if you're an emotional kind of person, you have this sense of all rightness. You know, nothing feels quite as good as things flowing. But the other side of that is when they are not flowing, when they're ebbing, nothing feels quite as bad as that. And you can way overreact, right? You can way overreact to when things aren't flowing. And so what happens is you start to think about it. And what can you do? And why is it not working? And then that is the beginning of what I, borrowed from my therapist, call the churn, where this situation drops you into a spot where you do not know how to proceed. And then you begin to get really upset and frustrated and existential about it. And these thoughts go very quickly from things aren't quite working all the way to, what am I doing with my life? This is never going to work for me. This is such a waste of time. Why does it never work out? And I've been there. I have been there so many times. This podcast exists because of the churn in part. Now, I've said this many times. I've told the story many times of having been on the road where you're flowing. You know, you play 36 gigs in 42 days or whatever, and every day, and you're doing the thing, and it's working, and you're getting paid, and you're playing well, and it's like the future is wide open. And then you come in off the road, and the flow stops. In my case, you know, as a hired player, come in off the road, don't have a lot lined up, and then all of a sudden, you're like, it's not working anymore. Like, I was so close, I was so high. We were flowing so well, and then you come in and it just like comes to this incredible jarring halt. And you sort of sit there dazed for a minute. And if you are a certain temperament, if you're a certain type of person, you look at that and say, okay, this is a natural part of the process of touring. You know, touring is ramping up, complete anxiety for me. And then you're on the road and you're playing the shows and it's great. And you come back and you come down, the big old tour come down. And then you sort of wait that out. And then you begin the next process. But, you know, if you're like me and you don't have a lot of confidence in all of that, and you kind of feel like you're going to get found out at any minute anyways, and every tour you ever did, you have in the back of your mind could be the last one because there isn't another one lined up. You get yourself into a turmoil and then you begin to churn. And so it was with me. I come back off the road with Sarah. nothing doing, no gigs booked. For a second, it looked like I was going to be able to have a career, and then it's gone again. This ping-ponging that happens, and you don't know what to do, and you don't know why it's not working, even though it just did for 6 weeks. And then you start the thoughts, like, I can't do this anymore. I don't know how to proceed with this. I don't know why this isn't working for me. I try hard, damn it. I work hard. I put the effort in. I give my very best. I play well. I sing well. I'm willing. I'm willing to make the sacrifices. And it's not working out. And then you just begin to churn. And I went through more than one depressive episode. And what the churn does is it just swirls these thoughts around in your head over and over and over and over. And then, if you're like me, you attach to those thoughts. You begin to see those thoughts about things not working out as reality, even though if you just pulled back a level and you could have a little bit more perspective on things, you could see that it's merely part of a process. But I don't do so well with that, or at least I didn't. And so I would sit there and begin to churn. I had this dream about being a musician. I was just living it. It's gone again. And then you churn. I can't do this anymore. I can't make a freaking living. Why isn't this working out? Why does it work for some people? It doesn't work for me, and I don't know what to do. And that just begins to pull you down. The thing about the churn is that it's always a downward motion. You sit there and just overthink. You ruminate over and over and over. It's always bad thoughts. It's always bad thoughts. And what it does is it has this gravitational effect whereby it locks you in place. You can even imagine yourself as being screwed right into the freaking ground. It roots you there. It roots you there, and then these negative thoughts, these disaster thoughts, these panic thoughts, this catastrophizing, this self-pity, this lamenting just becomes reality. And if you don't put a check on it, if you let it run wild, as I have in the past, depression follows thereupon. And then you go from things aren't working out for me to I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. If you are like I am, and these thoughts can take over you, and you have this weird self-concept where you question your value anyways. Your subconscious is great at looking for validation. It's great at looking for stuff that supports your belief, right? It's a bias that exists. Confirmation bias. Like, I think I'm useless and a piece of crap, and life is showing me that, because that's what I'm looking for subconsciously, right? Now, you listen to Abraham Hicks. Abraham Hicks will tell you, yeah, your life is an outer reflection of your thoughts. You keep thinking you're not good enough and stuff doesn't work out for you, and boom, look around you. You're not good enough and stuff's not working out for you. Depends on your perspective. Not here to talk about the art of manifestation. Okay. But again, unchecked, these churning thoughts just pull you into your head and then suck you down into this gravity where you're just frozen in place. And I could sense my friend being in that kind of position, not knowing what to do. And then if you confront this position of not knowing what to do from a healthy perspective, with a sense of curiosity, with a sense of optimism, that's a much different animal, okay? But if you're in the churn and you're being pulled down, you're not capable of those positive thoughts. In fact, those thoughts become kind of offensive in a way. It's like your whole body rejects and reacts to that positivity. Like, it's not worth it. Like, it's a waste of time. Like, get real, man. It's really powerfully blinding. The churn is amazing. The churn is so freaking powerful. But the funny thing about it is if you can get some perspective on it, everything is useful, right? Everything is information. So you find yourself sitting there churning. As I have been coming off the road prior to starting this podcast, I was in a horrendous depression. Just a bad depression about not knowing why drumming wasn't working for me consistently. And it would work in these little bursts, and then it just wouldn't work. And then, I had this underlying belief all the time, as I've said. not a good enough player. I don't live in a place where full-time music is really that much of a possibility. I had all the reasons lined up why this couldn't work. And I think energetically that informs your manifestations. I know I wasn't going to say that, but there's something in this. So I'm sitting there believing that it can't happen and being depressed about it. And had I been more optimistic about how it can happen, my therapist will say this to me all the time. In a given situation, stop and think, not why isn't this working, but how can this work? And it reframes your perspective, also reframes your energy, I think. Don't want to get too weird and esoteric about this, but I would sit there churning, and I didn't want to know people's ideas on how to fix it, I didn't want to hear that stuff because you get locked into this kind of self-pity and this fear, and it feels weirdly comfortable, and it's all instructive. The point being, it's all instructive. What is it if you can step back and ask the question, what does the churn do for you? My therapist asked me that too, because, I go through these phases where I'm anxious, where I'm ruminating, where I'm depressed, where I get wrapped up in these negative projections. And instead of solving any of the problems, I just sit there spinning around with a zillion thoughts. That's the churn. It's like a freaking tornado in your mind of nothing. There's cows sticking out of it and trucks getting flung around. All these thoughts, none of them linear, none of them going in a direction. Just spinning around, rooting you in place, keeping you from movement. And my therapist will say, what does that do for you? What does that serve you? How does it serve you? Because we don't do things that don't on some level reward us. It's the basics of human behavior. We do things that reward us. Even if those rewards are negative, in some weird twisted way, they become positive. So you're sitting there churning and you ask yourself, what is this doing for me? Is it protecting me? If you're rooted in place and you can't move forward on anything, you can't really fail, can you? I've confronted this as a writer in the past, like having writer's block. I can't write. I got nothing. I have no impulse. I have no intuition on this. I have just no impetus to write. And you feel awful about that because writers write, dude. But then you step back and you're like, why am I churning about this? Well, if I don't write, then I can't fail as a writer. That's a weird kind of oxymoron, It's like, if I don't write, then I can't produce my stuff that gets rejected that proves I'm not a good enough writer. So I'll fail in this weird way by choice. You know what I mean? Is it a fear that keeps you churning? Are you afraid to move forward with whatever it is that you're trying to do that's not working for you? Or is it holding up a self-belief? And you walk around with this belief, even unconscious. You're not even aware of it. This belief, this self-concept that says, I'm not good enough. I'm a failure. Things don't work out for me. You might not even be aware that this exists. You may be, in your speaking, the most positive person of all time, but in your real subconscious mind, is that a bunch of BS? Do you actually fear and believe that you're not good enough? And so you sit there churning, not accomplishing anything because that props up the belief you have. That props up your identity. Again, it's a confirmation bias. Or do you simply, legitimately not know what to do? And do you fear that? And are you just like, I don't even know who to ask. I don't know what to do here. And so I'm going to sit here churning, and then I'm going to add a layer of churn that goes on about how stupid I am, or how naive, or how I just don't know what I'm doing. And I've never known what I'm doing. And everybody else knows what they're doing, but I don't. I'm just going to sit here and just churn. I'm just going to spin that around and dig deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into this hopelessness about the situation. And that feels, in a sickening way, really good because it proves what you believe about yourself, which is that you're not good enough, you don't know what you're doing, and nothing is ever going to work out for you. And you know what? You can sit and churn away for freaking years. Or you can try to mask that with alcohol, drugs, or social media, or a sex addiction. You can mask the churn and pretend it's not there anymore, but it's there, and it's just pulling in all of that stuff, all of the negative energy you can find. It's pulling it in and just making the churn heavier, pulling you down deeper. And after a while, if this just goes unchecked, this can just be your life now. Those people who just seem to always have a cloud over their heads. And maybe it's legitimate. People go through awful freaking stuff, but a lot of times it's just an unchecked churn that's become reality, that's become fake reality. We've talked about fake reality versus real reality before. The churn is great at that. Just masks everything. You don't see, you don't think clearly anymore. You just get absorbed in these thoughts. You attach to them emotionally, and they become your reality because you don't know what to do, or you don't believe you're good enough, or. And all of this stuff can be gleaned. You can learn about your own thought processes by observing your churn. I had to stop and think about that. I'm depressed all the freaking time when I come off the road. Why is that? And then you have to confront that. What is it? Is it an ego thing? Is it whatever? And the thing is, the churn will keep you rooted there forever. But I was talking to my friend who's in this churn right now, not quite knowing where to be, how to proceed. Going to focus on writing, going to focus on performing, going to make a video, going to do this, going to do that, just ping-ponging. That's the churn. Not being able to focus on one thing long enough to proceed. No, this idea is better. As a writer, I had this all the time. Write 25 pages of a book, feel like it's going somewhere, hit a little roadblock, and then just jump off. No, this idea is better. And then do 20 pages of that. Oh, no, this idea is better. And I've got several 100-page bits of novels that tapped out at 100 pages, and then I jumped to something else, because that's the churn. The churn can be long distance or short distance. But there's an antidote. All of this to say, there's an antidote to the churn, okay? And I learned this antidote, as I learn everything, from people way smarter than me. I got this one from Philip McKernan. Philip McKernan, life coach, motivational speaker, really, really intuitive, smart dude who gets human behavior, who understands the pain people go through and why that is, has a real keen eye for helping people scythe through their churn to get to the root of it, whatever it might be. Now, Philip McKernan has a phrase that's worth remembering, okay? And the phrase is, in the absence of certainty, take action. The antidote to the churn is action, friends. It's action, even the most simple actions, to get you out of the freaking churn. The churn is anti-momentum. And what you're missing when you're in the churn is momentum. You get into the churn because you don't have gigs booked, or you're not writing, or you don't have this, or you don't have that. You've lost this momentum. You come off the road, which is all momentum. It's just a whirlwind of momentum. Feels freaking great. And then you come to that jarring halt. No more momentum. You start to freaking churn. One of the reasons I started the podcast was to give me auxiliary momentum coming off the road. So I would land and, okay, I know I'm going to get depressed because I got no gigs lined up, because that's the way it is for me right now. And I need something. And the podcast became that thing. So I could dedicate this energy, and it's all just energy, kids. The churn is an amazing vortex of energy. Powerful energy. Like your negative feelings, your sadness, your depression, your anxiety, that is enormously powerful energy, just misdirected or not managed. And it's incredibly hard to do, okay? But in the absence of clarity, take action. Not certainty, clarity, but either it works. In the absence of clarity, take freaking action. So instead of sitting there churning, I started making the podcast. It gave me an outlet for that energy, gave me a direction for that energy, gave me a feeling of momentum moving forward. When you're in the churn, what you are missing is momentum. And the way to find momentum is to take action. Take the simplest action. All right, you are a singer-songwriter. Your career is stuck in a moment. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to proceed. Take action. Book a freaking show. Book 2 shows. Have something that provides a way out of the freaking churn. Something that pulls your mind out of these negative thoughts about things that are not working and puts it into a much more productive thing, which is, okay, I'm going to reach out to these 4 promoters. I'm going to reach out to these 5 venues. Don't you see already how you begin to shift that churn into momentum, into action moving forward? And so one morning, and it takes some gumption, okay? If you are deep in the churn, getting yourself to do anything, really, really difficult to do because, again, your mind is in this place where nothing works and nothing matters. It's this complete emptiness. It's this complete giving up. And it's hard to make yourself do something if you give up, right? But you need to take that action. So this morning, I'm going to message 10 venues where I've played before, try to book a couple of gigs, and then all of a sudden, it has a couple of effects. One, it's a real practical effect where it takes your mind out of that churn and it just focuses on something else. One of the reasons the churn works so well is because you attach to those thoughts and you keep thinking them. These are different thoughts. Okay, I need to look up that email address. Is this person still booking that venue? When's the last time I played there? Okay, this would be a good place. All of a sudden, you're contemplating just much different things. And you release that attachment to those emotions and you feel better already. Like you got an hour or 2 hours where you focus just on that. And then the other effect of that is that you begin actually to generate some movement forward. All right, I'm doing something. One of the worst things about the churn is that you're not doing anything. And then you beat yourself up because you're not doing anything. It just compounds. It just adds layers of complexity and filth to that churn. But now I'm doing something, which means I'm taking control again. This is all about feeling in control of what you're doing. When you're lost in the churn, it's because you feel a lack of control. It's because you feel like you can't do anything or you don't know what to do. But then you just take a morning, email a bunch of venues. All of a sudden, you are taking some control. This is the antidote. Feeling as though you have some control. And then from there, beginning to generate this feeling. Okay, I feel good. I emailed 10 venues. I'm still an artist. I'm still doing this, Or maybe you just don't know. Maybe you don't know how to book or who to book with. Some people are at the beginning stages. And so you send a message to somebody who does. Hey, can we get together? I'll buy you a coffee. Can you just give me some tips on where to book and how to book? Or maybe you're planning like a bigger tour. Or maybe you want to do some recording. Well, bloody, hook up a coffee with somebody. Any small gesture that gets you moving in a direction. It's like, I don't know how to do this. In the absence of clarity, take action. I didn't know how to do the podcast. I didn't know how to do the freaking podcast. It's one of the reasons I didn't for so long. Didn't understand the tech. Didn't understand how you publish a podcast. Didn't understand how this works. And so I set myself to trying to learn some of those things, right? Then you have to be careful about getting on your own case about not understanding things. But the point is, you put yourself into this vein where the churn can begin to kind of unravel and then push into some momentum. In the absence of clarity, take action. So if you're churning right now, stop and pull yourself just a little bit out of it, a little higher perspective. Try to identify what you're churning for. Are you avoiding doing something? Do you not know how to do something? Do you really not want to do something and then you feel guilty about that? Are you afraid? What is it? Why are you churning right now? Why are things not moving forward? And what can you do about it? And then, in the absence of clarity, even if you don't have a real clear, direct idea on what to do or how, take some even small action. Have a drink with someone. Have a coffee with someone. Research something. Pull yourself out of that churn and begin to set yourself on a path of moving forward, and then watch that momentum happen. Because the churn can reverse, the reverse churn, where you begin to spit out this momentum, and then 3 of the venues that you reached out to write back to you. They got dates here, they got dates there. Oh, let's make a calendar. Where else can I book around that? And then all of a sudden, you're just doing it again. You feel as though you're in some control. You feel as though you're moving again. And then life, the universe energy, begins to suck up into that vortex and push you forward, The momentum begins to happen. Book a show and then have that to work towards. You know what I mean? And then as this momentum gathers, other stuff will just get pulled in, or book a writing session with somebody. Book a coffee with somebody who runs this freaking studio and find out about the parameters of recording there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Go see a show, be out in the world, pull yourself from the churning thoughts. It's the same thing as my Fix Your Door Handle episode, where I was like, I was in a depression then. And so I set myself to fixing a door handle because it pulled me out of those thoughts, gave my mind something productive, a productive problem to solve. The mechanics of fixing a door handle, the mechanics of emailing 10 venues, right? This is a problem to solve that's solvable beyond or in opposition to the problem is, I don't know what to do with my life. And you just go to blue screen because you have no answer to that. Take a small action in the absence of clarity. Take action, kids. That is the antidote to the churn. So if you find yourself depressed, if you find yourself lost in a churn of anxiety, just take an action. I know it's hard. When you are depressed, the hardest thing in the freaking world is to take a positive step. But I promise it is the key. Taking one step out of the churn is the key to resetting that momentum, putting you on a much more positive headspace, a much more problem-solving headspace, and pulling you into just a better mindset, better mental health. It's just the way this works, man. So, again, I know I'm beating this point into the ground. In the absence of clarity, folks, if you're in the churn, take a simple action, okay? That was a bit of a rant. I've been churning just a little bit about this podcast, not just this episode, but the podcast more generally. Now, what do I do with this? What does this thing want to be? Unfortunately, I've reached a point of evolution in my thinking where I can do that somewhat objectively. And that was just a 30-minute rant that I was not 100% expecting to come out the way it did. But here we are, and I've done it. Before we proceed from this point, just going to take a second to do the Patreon plug. Yes, there is a Patreon page for this podcast. It is patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. Why does it exist? Why does it exist? It exists because I would like to monetize this program. I put a hell of a lot of work into it. It takes an extraordinary amount of my bandwidth, and it costs me money. Frankly, it costs me money to do this. And so I started the Patreon, the podcast Patreon, because I would like to monetize this program. I mean, that's not an unreasonable thing. I did not want to do that through ads. Ads drive me freaking crazy. I cannot stand turning on a podcast and I got to listen to 5-6 minutes of freaking ads before we even get to it. And then you get into the juicy bits and then we stop for another ad break. Let's have a message from our sponsors, like it's 1940s radio. Don't want to do that to you. Don't want to force you to listen to more freaking ads. I mean, there's a reason, as I've said before, why you sign up for Spotify Premium or YouTube Premium. And the first thing they do is kill the ads because the ads are freaking annoying and they drive us crazy. I don't want to do ads for you or to you. So I started the Patreon page because, as Blind Boy says, it's a system based on soundness and kindness. Patreon is you saying, I appreciate the work you're doing, young man. Thank you for putting this effort in. I'm getting something from your podcast. Inspiration, motivation, education, new music, whatever it is. A friendly voice in your ear holes warms your cockles. And as a response to that, to say thank you for that, I will offer you $5 a month. That's my one tier of membership. The price, of a cup of coffee, tipping me $1.25 for every episode I do. That's how I try to frame it. If it's worth $1.25 to you, this episode, please consider supporting me via Patreon, patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. I do not want to belabor that either. Don't want to do that, can't do that. That's totally cool. I get it, man. You're under no pressure or obligation. This comes from your own warm goggles, okay? Want to help out? Please share the episodes. I put up teasers. I put up photos. I put up audiograms. Please share them around. Please tell your friends. You like this podcast, it's worth listening to. Ratings and reviews. I'm still, going to keep beating that horse too, kids. Take 5 seconds, please drop me a 5-star on your preferred podcast platform. And a review just warms my freaking cockles, kids. I want to thank everyone who has done all of that or any of that, or just written me a message, and you can do so. You can message me via the socials. You can message me, john-huff.com/contact. Send me a message, and those people who have done that to say they liked this episode or that episode, got something from this episode, have you considered this? I so appreciate that. Thank you so much for letting me know you exist out there. And hey, Christmas is coming, kids, and who doesn't love a really fly t-shirt from your favorite podcast? john-huff.com/shop. I got some cool t-shirts there. I got coffee mugs. I got cool stuff going on. So please consider buying that podcast listener in your life a little merch from the JHP for Christmas, man. Thank you to everyone for all of your support in those and so many other ways. I do genuinely appreciate the lot of you. Patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. Now, I'm going to play you out with something somewhat self-indulgent. My name's on the freaking poster. I can be a little bit self-indulgent once in a while, okay? Did a Q&A a couple episodes back for my 50th birthday. Maybe that was last episode. They all blur together, kids. They all blur together. And I answered a couple questions from my old pal Langer. Good old Langer. And he responded with a follow-up. He said to me, I'm not direct quoting here. I'm giving you the gist. Can you point us to 3 songs that you've played on that illustrate your style of drumming? Basically, what 3 songs have you got that are you kind of drummer in a nutshell? And I think this is a follow-up to Dan the Man Cunningham's question about what 3 albums define you as a listener, I guess, of music. And I tried my best to answer that. Now we have what 3 songs define you as a drummer. And I got them, okay? And where can we find them? And I'll tell you all that. I'll do this as quickly as I can. The first song that I've played on that I think defines me as a drummer is a little tune called 4 Steps Down by that old-time group Hiroshima Hearts, okay? Now known as Jen Marino and the Hearts, or Jen and the Hearts. They used to be Hiroshima Hearts when I was the founding drummer in that band and a contributing songwriter. And one of the songs we wrote, which is on our Bone Music EP, which was, I want to say 2016, is this tune called 4 Steps Down. And I choose that one because it is illustrative, because it illustrates, I guess, my approach to playing rock drums. As much as I'm a genre guy, Hiroshima Hearts is a rock and roll freaking band, man. And we had a bluesy, kind of 70s Aerosmith kind of vibe. And that's what we were writing to. And so 4 Steps Down I like for a couple of reasons. A, I brought that song in. I brought what became that song in. So I wrote the main guitar riff for it. I wrote the music for the verses and the pre-chorus. I brought this structure in. And then I like that about it. But I also like that the song exists in the form it does because the rest of the band picked that up and finished the song for me. So our guitar player, Tyler, turned my rudimentary guitar bits into real guitar parts and then wrote the chorus. And then Jen, the singer, wrote the lyrics and the melodies. And there's a breakdown section in the middle, which I think the bass player, Mike, was the driving force behind that. And then there's some cool harmonies happening, which the vital secret weapon, Kimiko wrote a lot of the vocal harmonies on it. So it became this song that I brought in that the band collaboratively turned into the song that you hear. And I think it's a really great song. And the video got some attention because it was us playing in this old church, really spooky kind of vibe. And there was a cloaked figure who comes down the aisle to hear us playing in this church, ostensibly the devil. And that character was played by none other than Morgan Lander herself of Kitty, of metal legends Kitty. Morgan Lander is a friend of the band, and so she appeared in that video, which got more attention than the song did, although it was played on the Regina rock station once or twice. Once for sure, maybe twice. So, that's your 2-cent royalty check from SoCan, kids. One time we were listening to local campus radio, and we just happened to turn the dial, and Four Steps Down was playing on that station. We thought that was great. And then when the song ended, it played again. And then when the song ended, it played again. And again, there was something wrong. I think nobody was in the booth and was stuck on repeat. And so Four Steps Down played like 8 times in a row. And even we were sick of it by the end of that, but it was really freaking funny to listen to. And I like that song because it's a banger. It's this bluesy riff. And as a drummer, it's really cool because we played that song for a long, long time before we recorded it. And that's a key thing. Parts sometimes develop over time, right? Like I've had it where I've gone into the studio kind of raw, kind of cold. Like here are the songs, we've never worked on them before, working on somebody else's scratch demos, whatever. And you kind of write the drum parts in the moment, and that can work really well. And sometimes, years later, you think, if we'd been able to work those up, I could have done this. I could have done this a little bit differently, whatever. I never like listening to anything I recorded, by the way. I always feel like it's crappy and it could have been so much better. That's just me and my own kind of personal issues. Four Steps Down, we played for a long, long time. And so I was able to work out parts. I was able to work out real, repeatable parts. So when we went to make that video and the band is performing live, I'm playing the studio track, note for note, because they were specific parts. And I just like the way it worked. There was like in the verses, the first verse, like there's like this little 16th note hi-hat thing happening. And one of my favorite things is to play a fill and one of the beats is an open hi-hat. And that happens right in the first verse. Like there's subtle stuff going on in there that most people probably wouldn't even notice. And that's the story of my life. A lot of what I feel is the cool stuff that I do on recordings, people don't even notice, but I know it's there. And I developed this philosophy at a certain point in my career, such as it is, where I tried to build a signature into every song that I record. Just a little signature that I know is there. Usually it's a repeating thing, and most people don't even notice it, but I know it's there. And so there's a couple of signatures in Four Steps Down. I just think it's a banging song. And when we played it live, it would really crush. I didn't love the production on the Bone Music EP. It's good, it's professional, and it reflects what I think the band presented. At that point in time, we were going for kind of a Jack White sound. And so it was a bit trebly, bit AM radio, not a lot of bass in it. Well, I wanted it to sound like an AC/DC song. I wanted us to have that kind of really thick bass. I wanted it to be heavy, really thick guitars, really thick bass. That's not the way it wound up being recorded. And so in my mind, I hear it somewhat differently. But live, I think it had more of that sound. And it's so, because it has like a really tight ending and we would just nail it. And nailing a really tight ending is so freaking cool, man. I mean, that's what makes people sit up and freaking take notice. Breakdown section of that song is all toms, right? So I'm just hitting toms, whatever. It's like, it's a really cool song. And the band did some really, really great stuff with it. And I think the drum parts just work. I think they just add the energy to the song. And the verses are in halftime. The choruses are full. The main riff is played up tempo. Then the verses and the choruses are in halftime. It's freaking heavy. You know, when we would catch that zone playing it live, it freaking rocked, man. It really smoked. And the harmonies were there live. Really, really great. It's what I loved so much about that band is that we sang those harmonies live, man. 3-part harmonies. Really crushed it a lot of the time. And that was the signature of the band at the time. Plus Jen's voice and then these kind of bluesy riffs. It was a good band. I miss playing in it. And I miss those people. And I just think Four Steps Down is representative of my approach, I guess, to playing rock music, which was to lay on the groove with a couple little signatures here and there. And I've gotten better at recording. I mean, this was the early days of me recording, and there's stuff that I would do so much more confidently now, so much differently now. But that's the same with anything. You know, you evolve and get better over time. And so I just last December, recorded the Fresh Breath album that's coming out imminently. A couple singles are floating around now. And I mean, that's a much different sort of band, but it becomes much more simple. You know, simple really works well in the studio, and simple is kind of my approach. So Four Steps Down's a touch busier than I might normally play, but it's a big rock song. So, you know, it's got to have freaking drums in it. And I just really like that tune. And I like the way the drum parts worked out. You know, the guitar and drums played off each other at a certain point. Like there's a Bell of the Ride cymbal on the breakdown that matches an upstroke that Tyler played on guitar. Just stuff that we worked out over playing that song over and over and over and over again. And it's that kind of stuff, instruments playing off each other and then hitting a tight ending or hitting a tight stop. And we go into the breakdown section. There's like a hard dun-dun and it stops. And live, everybody would think the song was over. And it was just a cool moment live where we would hit that and then people would start cheering. The song's not over. We're just going into the breakdown section, you know? But you have these instruments playing off each other, doing stuff like syncopated stuff or playing stuff together, and then hitting a hard ending like that. Really tight. That's what being tight is all about, you know? And I think that song was just illustrative. I can't say that freaking word. It illustrates, I don't know, my approach to playing simply, but with a little bit of flourish here and there. Like, I really love the second verse. Really love the second verse. Now, in the first verse, I played that hi-hat thing as a fill, you know, a couple little embellishments. And then in the second verse, it was just like 4 on the floor. Boom, cha, boom, cha. And the groove just sits in there. So nice. Playing as simply as possible. The groove just sits there. And you can just see people in the audience sometimes really feeling on the second verse. And they're just like, you know, it's really fun to watch an audience react to a song that you wrote. I mean, us collectively. Watching an audience react to the choices we made musically, you know, to just sit on the simplest groove in that second verse, no embellishments, and just watch people feel that, you know, and then watch them react to a stop or something you do that, you know, they just notice. And they used to happen with Four Steps Down all the time. And so that song, Langer, which you've heard, and you can find the video, Jen and the Hearts, on YouTube. You can find the Bone Music EP on Spotify. You can hear it. That one is just me as a rock drummer, I guess. Simple, choosing the moments, and then, you know, when it's appropriate, just boom chick and letting the groove just wrap around that. I always want people dancing, you know what I mean? I always want people reacting in some way, whether that's just banging out or sitting in a little groove or doing something kind of moody and evocative. People sit up and take notice. I try to do, to the extent that I can, I try to do drum parts that are interesting but appropriate, and we'll get to that. Second song that I'm kind of proud of, that's, again, an illustration, is the song Everything I Wanted by Nimue. Nimue is a project I started with Ann Menez back in 16, 17. We released an EP in 17, the self-titled Nimue EP. And the first song is this really great kind of Fleetwood Mac influenced song called Everything I Wanted. It's got a really, really nice, gentle pocket. It's not a gentle song. It's like a Fleetwood Mac song. And it's just got a really nice vibe and pocket. Ann recorded on 12-string guitar, shimmery, very shimmery, and it's just got a really nice chorus. And Ann nobody's better than Ann. Ann's voice is nobody better. And I love that whole record. That record was, for me, a kind of a turning point in the sense of having a little more confidence in the studio and a little more confidence in how I approach things. And when I talk about having signatures in songs, every song on that EP, I think there's 5, every song has a signature in it. A particular fill that repeats, or a particular pattern that repeats, that was very deliberate. This is the record that I was most deliberate on in terms of the choices that I made as a drummer. And a lot of the choices I made, you probably wouldn't even notice. But I know they're there. And so everything I wanted, it's just, again, it's got a little hi-hat thing. If you listen to the groove during the verses, there's an open hi-hat, there's a little, again, 16th note thing, and a ghost note. That's it. In those verses, open hi-hat, 16th, and a ghost note thing, or like a triplet thing. And that's the signature. That's the signature. And I did it very deliberately, because it felt right to me. And that's another one we worked up for a long time before we recorded it. And that whole song is about the melody. And it's about Ann's voice. And then at the end, we come to the end of the song, and there's kind of a shimmery outro where it's just sort of Ann singing a few lines very gently. And I really like what happened with the drums on that section. It's just a couple of tom fills that provide this emotional angle. It's a winsome kind of song. It's not a happy song, and when we get to the end, there's a bit of regret in the lyrics. There's a bit of regret in the tone. It's a little bit dark, and toms have a unique ability to sort of pull or accent that kind of dark emotion. And I did a couple of tom things at the end that I think really supported the vibe that Ann set in the song. They were kind of providing this weight and depth, right? Deeper drums, deep sort of tom hits that provide a punch, and punctuate this kind of emotional sadness. And I think it really, really works. And one of the reasons it works is because of the production on it, which was Ann with Mike Marucci at Sonic Zen Studios. And he did some really, really interesting things with the drum sounds on that record and where the drums sit in the mix and how they echo through and how they reverb there and the snare sound that he produced. It's all, I can play the parts, but the parts work as well as they do because of the production on that. So never forget the producer. Never forget who makes the freaking sounds. But I just really like everything I wanted as an example of having signatures in songs. And there are others, they're scattered throughout that whole record. You can find the Nimue EP on Spotify as well. It's the first song, Everything I Wanted. One of my favorite songs that I've ever recorded. And one of my favorite things that I've ever recorded. Whether you think the drum parts are cool or not, I just think that it was the first time that I really put thought into producing these little signatures in the songs and having them work with what's actually going on in the songs. So I say Everything I Ever Wanted, but probably my ultimate signature song, which has been talked about on this show before, is Lionsgate by Carly Thomas. Now, Carly and I have a long history. We have played together a lot all across freaking Canada. And Lionsgate is my signature drum song. It's what I do as a drummer. And it's got kind of my biggest thing in it, which is to play snare drum, but play the snares off and use mallets on it. Turns a snare drum into kind of a timbale. And so Lionsgate is, like so many of Carly's songs, this evocative, emotional, winsome, sad kind of song. And it's all about Carly's kind of vocal delivery and the guitar parts on it. And so what the drums do on that song is they just provide, kind of like the end of Everything I Wanted, they provide the atmosphere. They help provide the atmosphere, right? And so, Carly's singing about being in BC, thinking about her life gone by, thinking about her life going forward, sitting by the Lionsgate Bridge and just sort of looking out about it. It's this really kind of reflective, self-conscious kind of song about where things are at. And so I was determined from the beginning not to have a backbeat on this song anywhere. I'm not going to have a backbeat. I was drawing from Jason Tate with the Weaker Thans. I was drawing from some other drummers who do really artsy stuff that I admire. And so I turned the snares off and I was playing. It's not even any kick drum, I don't think, through whenever the song comes in. It's the first verse or whatever. Just Carly. And then I come in on the second verse with the drums. And it's mallets on the floor tom, mallets on the snare drum. Just this repeating pattern, which adds this kind of sadness, this kind of melancholy to it, right? Which I think is just really cool. And it's subtle. And people watch you do that and they're like, whoa, what's that cat doing? This is something different. They're not used to seeing a guy whip out mallets and turn the snares off. It's just a different thing. And that's become my signature. I've recorded, I want to say I've done 3 songs that way now. It's kind of one of the things that I go to when a song has a certain vibe and needs a certain something. It's possible to overdo it. The first time I did it was on this song, Lionsgate by Carly. And so I just play it that way. And then she gets through the second verse, and then there's a guitar solo that comes in. You feel the song beginning to amp up a little bit, and playing the lead guitar solo. And so I'm starting to hit some cymbals, like a couple of big crashes here and there on a song that's pretty quiet and gentle, has real impact. Dynamics count, kids. Dynamics make everything. So if you've been playing gently, floor tom, snares off, mallets, and then you bang a crash cymbal, that has real impact. And if you hit that at an emotional moment on a key change, bam, really, really effective, right? So you play through the guitar solo, things are ramped up a little bit, and then it all pulls down again. And it's just Carly and her guitar singing this kind of winsome line about whatever. And then she starts playing this repeating pattern. And you can sense that the song is building up to something. There's been all this pent-up emotion throughout the sadness of this tune and the loneliness of this tune. And it's about to burst. And then the moment it bursts, I hit a snare drum. I guess it's technically the only backbeat in the song. You're playing this live, it's tricky. You got to flip the snares back on, drop your mallets, pick up sticks. I hit a snare drum, just one snare drum note, loud, as a pickup into the band just breaking loose. Right? Huge guitar solo, big volume. This release of pent-up emotion happens here. And it's all about the guitar solo. But again, I was determined not to have a backbeat, right? So I'm still hitting the floor tom, but I'm just doing floor tom and snare drum and then rolls, right? It's just floor tom, snare drum, bum, 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 cha, 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 bum, 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 cha, da, 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 da. I know you don't speak the drumming language. It's really weird sounds, but it's all, there's no backbeat. There's no don't, ba, 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 ba. No backbeat. Just using drums for effect. And I just really love this part. And I think Carly really loves this part. And it's the most prominent part that I've written for a song. And the whole concept was, let's never have a backbeat. And this is how we're going to do it. And it works. I mean, live, when the band kicks in with that snare drum hit and the tom rolls and the guitar solo, it's like really powerful, really profound. I've seen audiences knocked on their ass when we play that song. And I can't take credit for that. It's Carly's song. She wrote it. But I think the drum parts work freaking perfectly for it. And I'm really pleased because they were interesting. Again, I said, I'm dedicated to writing drum parts that are interesting when I can, And I feel like Jason Tate might have written a part like that, or Jason McGurr. And I'm like, yay, yay, I did something that's freaking cool too. And that's my signature. That's the one right there. So Langer, me as a drummer, 4 Steps Down by Hiroshima Hearts / Jan and the Hearts. Everything I Wanted by Nimue, and Lionsgate by Carly Thomas. You can find that. We did a live in-studio recording of it. So there's a video. There's a live video too, at least one or two videos of us playing it live, which aren't necessarily great, just the audio quality, etc. But go find Carly Thomas Lionsgate at the Sugar Shack, and that's everybody playing it together live. And you can hear how that song works. You can see how some of it goes. And I really appreciate that question. I know it was self-indulgent. I know. I don't want this to be a program about me talking about myself, but I appreciate that question. It gives me a chance just to look at how far I've come. You know, there's a point in time where I couldn't have done any of that because I was too freaking scared. I would never have put myself out in the sense of being hired by anybody or being involved in this movie. I never would have felt like I could. You know, I never would have felt like I was capable of it. And then you go back and you revisit some of the stuff you did and you're like, I did it. I did that. And you can do it. And you can do it. And if you're churning about whether you can do it, in the absence of clarity, take action, kids. This has run way longer than I intended it to. And I have more recordings out there of stuff, you know. Go to my website, john-huff.com/music. And most of what I've ever played on is listed there if you want to hear it. A wide range of stuff. And the Fresh Breath record is coming. And it's got its own signatures on it. And the Lindsay and the Lonelies are working on a record. Those tunes have their signatures in them. And I'm getting better all the time. Getting better all the time at figuring out what works in the studio and how to execute it. And it's all a process, you know, it's all experience. The same as any other damn thing. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Langer, for the questions. You know, this episode, I guess it's very experiential, but it just reinforces the point that good things happen when you put yourself out there, kids. And if you're struggling with the churn, genuinely take one small action, you know, pull yourself out of that headspace, begin to feel as though you're taking some control again, and then see how that just lifts your mood and takes you to places. My voice is freaking gone, still wrestling with this cold, but I'm getting there. Thank you so much for listening. And hey, kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. You were everything I wanted. On this Thanksgiving Day, let us give our gratitude to the football gods for Arsenal's 1-0 win at long freaking last over Manchester City. North London is red, kids.